Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. The day I moved in was supposed to mark a new beginning. Instead, I found a gravel lot where my brand new dream home had stood, demolished without warning. What followed was a battle against fraud, power, and a rogue HOA. They thought I'd walk away. They were wrong. I'd been eyeing the edge of the city for a while, that perfect in-between space where the skyline fades into trees and silence. But the Wi-Fi still works. After wrapping up a brutal 12-month project designing a corporate complex in downtown Austin, I finally had breathing room and a sizable check. I wasn't the Lamborghini type. What I wanted was space, glass walls, silence, and a long driveway where no one could bother me. I wanted a place to build something with someone. Sarah and I had been talking about moving in together for months. She loved the idea of getting out of downtown, and I loved the idea of a home that didn't vibrate every time a food truck passed by. The listing caught my eye late one night, half a bottle of wine into scrolling Zillow like it owed me something. A modern, angular steel and cedar house tucked into a pine stretch near the outskirts of a neighborhood called Redwood Trails. It had just been finished, still had that smells like caulk and drywall look. Clean lines, 2 stories, wide windows, a huge open lot behind it. And the best part? Private land. The listing said it plainly. Not part of the HOA jurisdiction, though technically next to the community border. A clean break from neighborhood committees and people named Chad with opinions about mulch. The sale process went like butter. The seller, a developer, had just finished construction and was offloading the property fast. My agent double-checked everything. Title clear, lot surveyed, county paperwork matched, no liens, no easements, no disputes. The title company confirmed it. The deed was clean, the seller had full rights, and I had a nice stack of documents to prove it. I signed, wired the funds, and held those keys like they were the final puzzle piece of my life. Sarah cried when I showed her the photos. "It looks like a damn Architectural Digest cover," she said. That meant more than any critic ever did. The day I first stepped into the house with the keys in my hand, it was still echoing. The walls bounced back my footsteps. It was mine. I walked from room to room like I was tracing the outline of my future. The furniture was still in storage, the movers scheduled for the following weekend. I only stayed for a few hours, long enough to sweep through every corner and lock the door behind me twice, like it would seal the whole world out. On the way out of the driveway, I saw a white SUV creeping by, slow enough to be suspicious. Not stopping, not waving, just observing, long enough that I took note of the HOA logo on the side panel. Redwood Trails Community Council. I waved. The driver didn't wave back. I didn't think much of it at the time. The following week flew by in a mess of packing, paperwork, and rescheduling a plumber who somehow got the wrong address 3 times. Sarah was staying at her apartment until the move, and I was going back and forth between my office and planning the setup for the new place. I kept thinking about what I'd plant in the backyard, maybe a stone path down to the tree line, maybe a little fire pit. Hell, I even started designing a pergola on my tablet one night. Everything was in motion. Nothing felt wrong. Until it did. The weather was perfect that morning. Clear sky, dry breeze, not a cloud in sight. The kind of day that makes you feel like life is playing fair for once. I was in the lead truck, windows down with a thermos of strong black coffee and a sense of satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. Behind me, a rental box truck full of Sarah's things rumbled along, followed by another with my gear, books, tools, and the oversized leather couch I refused to give up despite her protests. We were finally moving in. I'd texted Sarah that morning. "Today's the day. Next time you step in, it's our house." She replied with a heart and a gif of someone dancing with boxes. We turned onto the familiar rural stretch leading up to the property, and I was already picturing where the couch would go, what wall to mount the TV on. The gateposts came into view. I slowed down to make the turn into the driveway, and I slammed the brakes. There was nothing. The house was gone. No driveway. No walkway, no structure, no front door, no second-story glass panels, just gravel, flattened, compacted gravel, like a machine had come in and wiped the land clean. The foundation was scraped flat, fresh skid marks from heavy equipment carving arcs through the crushed stone. My first thought wasn't even panic. It was confusion so total it felt like vertigo. I blinked, got out of the truck, walked 10 paces forward, and just stood there. Where's the house? One of the movers asked behind me, stepping out and craning his neck like it might be hiding behind a tree. I didn't answer. I walked further in, heart kicking up into my throat. There were still chunks of concrete in the brush along the edge of the lot. A bent pipe, rebar, debris. This wasn't a construction site. This was the aftermath of demolition. I spotted two men in orange vests a few lots down, working on landscaping a neighboring property. I jogged over, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey, did you guys see what happened to the house here?" One of them turned and wiped sweat off his brow. 3 days ago. Big crew came in, took it down in less than a day. I blinked. "Who took it down?" He shrugged. Said they were with the HOA. Said the house was a mistake, some kind of ownership issue. They had paperwork and everything. Told us to steer clear. They were prepping the lot for a community rec zone, playground and pavilion, I think. I felt my jaw clench. Did they say whose house it was? Not really. There was a lot of arguing the first morning. Some guy showed up yelling about permits. Then a lady came. Blonde, sunglasses, clipboard, said it was being handled. Did anyone try to stop them? He laughed, genuinely. You ever try arguing with an HOA rep and a bulldozer at the same time? I didn't respond. My fingers were trembling by the time I pulled out my phone and called my realtor. Voicemail, called again. Nothing. The next number was the county sheriff's office. The dispatcher listened quietly, then told me a deputy would be out within the hour. I paced the flattened lot like I was expecting something to rise out of it. I kicked a chunk of insulation that had been missed in the cleanup and watched it crumble. The deputy, a stocky guy with a radio that wouldn't stop chirping, finally showed up 45 minutes later. I showed him the deed, the title report, the photos of the house from a week ago, the closing date. He flipped through the pages slowly, frowning. "Well," he finally said, "I can see your paperwork's in order, but this is complicated." "How is this complicated?" I asked, heat rising in my voice. "Someone tore down a legally purchased brand new home I owned. That's a crime, right?" He adjusted his belt. "Normally, yeah, but the HOA claims they purchased this parcel through a development company a month ago. There's some dispute about title rights. We don't have the authority to resolve land disputes. That's civil court jurisdiction. So they can just bulldoze my house and you won't do anything?" He sighed. "I get it. I'd be pissed too. But they have documents. Maybe fake, maybe not. And if they believed they had a right to the land, they didn't. I do. That's my name on the deed. I paid full price. Then you'll need to get a lawyer and take this to court," he said, handing me back the paperwork. "In the meantime, I suggest you don't confront them alone. Things like this get heated fast." He drove off, leaving a cloud of dust over the gravel that used to be my living room. Sarah called just as I was staring at the foundation outline, barely holding it together. "How's it going?" she asked, upbeat. "There's a problem," I said quietly. "A big one. I didn't sleep that night." I sat in the cramped guest room of Sarah's apartment, the place where we were supposed to stay temporarily until the house was set up, and stared at the same 3 documents on my laptop screen for hours. My deed, my closing disclosure, and the official Travis County title transfer. They were clean, immaculate. So clean it almost made me angry. Everything I did was right. Every signature, every notarization, every county stamp. And yet my house, was a gravel pit with rebar poking out of the dirt. I emailed my agent 3 more times, left 2 voicemails. Still no response. That in itself was starting to smell funny. The next morning, I headed to the Travis County Appraisal District to pull official records myself. The building smelled like old coffee and fluorescent lights. I told the clerk what I was looking for and gave him my parcel number. He typed it in and frowned. "Well," he said slowly, "that's interesting." "Define interesting," I said. There are 2 ownership filings attached to this parcel." I felt my stomach turn. One from 7 days ago. Your name, clean title transfer, verified with standard deed of trust. But there's another dated 5 weeks back, showing a transfer to a company called Hearth and Grove Developments. Who? He rotated the screen toward me. Sure enough, the document listed the transfer of the same parcel to a corporate entity I'd never heard of. I leaned in, reading the fine print. The seller was a man named Jonathan Creel. I had never heard that name in my life. "That's not the person I bought from," I said, pointing at the screen. "And I have no idea who Hearth and Grove is." "They filed with the county clerk office directly," he replied. "It happens sometimes when corporations handle bulk transfers. Usually through development firms. Did they include ID, notarization, anything? There's a notarized affidavit from a notary in Nevada, he said, clicking into the attachment. Doesn't look like it was filed electronically, just scanned. Can I get a full copy? Sure, $5 for hard copy or $2 for digital. I paid for both. Outside, I sat on a bench under a dying tree and scanned through the documents. The signature on the deed to Hearth and Grove looked rushed. The notary stamp was faint, like it had been copied or resized. Something felt immediately off. Sarah called just then, her voice tentative. Any updates? Yeah, I said. Apparently I bought a house someone else sold a month earlier, only that someone might not exist, and the buyer is a shell company. Wait, what? Exactly. I went straight to the office of a real estate attorney I'd worked with on a previous development project. Alan Bassett, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, the kind of guy who still wore suspenders and didn't believe in client-facing email. He looked over my folder while sipping something that smelled like bourbon and coffee. Tell me everything from the top, he said. I did. All of it. When I finished, he tapped the desk with his pen. If I'm reading this right, the second filing is either a mistake or fraud, possibly both. How does something like that even happen? You'd be surprised how often it does when HOAs get trigger-happy and lazy with verification. If they bought from someone who didn't have a valid title and then acted on that purchase, they're in serious legal exposure. They demolished the house. I saw, he said, already pulling up the photos I'd emailed. That alone puts you in a strong position, but the double filing complicates things. We need to prove theirs is invalid. What if they believe they own the land? Belief doesn't shield them from liability, Alex, especially when they took action like this without a court order. He stood up and pulled a thick folder from a cabinet. First step, I'll start a formal title challenge. Simultaneously, we send a demand letter to the HOA and notify their insurance carrier. If they don't settle, and they won't, we go public, media, county hearing, then court. As I left his office, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something bigger than a botched land deal. I passed by a bulletin board on my way out with flyers for HOA reform petitions. One titled, "Is Your Neighborhood Association Out of Control?" I was starting to think they all were. I wasn't exactly expecting a warm welcome, but even I didn't anticipate just how smug Karen Lowry would be. Alan advised me to request a face-to-face with the HOA before we escalated legally. Sometimes, he said, they get spooked just knowing a lawyer's involved. They'll try to bluff. Let them. Just record everything. I wasn't sure if he meant that literally, but I hit record on my phone's voice memo app anyway as I walked into the Redwood Trails Community Center. The place looked like a church converted into a Pinterest project. Shiplap walls, fake succulents in mason jars, and one too many inspirational signs. Karen was already seated at a round table near the front window, flipping through a folder like she was reviewing nuclear launch codes. She wore oversized sunglasses indoors and a blazer that practically screamed HOA President. Mr. Ransom, she said without standing. Thanks for coming. You know why I'm here. She didn't even blink. Of course, we regret the misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? I asked, sitting across from her. You bulldozed my house. That house, she said, slowly closing her folder, was an illegal structure, erected after the HOA rightfully acquired the parcel through a developer agreement. You are not listed as a verified community member. Because I'm not part of your HOA, my land was outside the association, and I have the title, the closing documents, and a signed deed from a licensed seller. She tilted her head, clearly unimpressed. We purchased the land from Hearth and Grove Developments a full month prior to your so-called acquisition. They're working with us to build a much-needed recreation area, playground, picnic pavilion, perhaps a dog run. The house that was on the site was not only in violation of HOA planning code, but obstructed community use. I leaned forward. You didn't notify anyone. You didn't send a cease and desist. You didn't get a court order. You just brought in a goddamn bulldozer and flattened it. Her lips curled slightly. We sent a registered letter to the address of record. You mean my house? The one you destroyed. She paused just long enough for the silence to burn. I don't think you understand how serious this is, I said. You acted without any legal review. You trespassed. You destroyed private property. And you did so based on documents from a shell company with no verified legal presence in Texas. I've already retained counsel and we've filed a title challenge. I strongly suggest you prepare to be in court." Karen didn't flinch. In fact, she looked mildly amused. "You can pursue whatever course of action you wish," she said. "The board acted in good faith and in accordance with the best interests of the Redwood Trails community. If your documents are authentic, I'm sure the court will sort it out." I stood. "They're authentic. What's fake is your entire justification, and you better hope the judge is more patient than I am." Her voice followed me as I turned to leave. "Oh, and Mr. Ransom, if you intend to continue using that lot without HOA approval, I must remind you that you're subject to community bylaws as soon as you enter shared space, including parking." I stopped, turned around. "There is no shared space. I don't belong to your HOA." She smiled. "We'll see." Back in the car, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a cocktail of rage and disbelief. I called Alan, filled him in on every word. "She's betting on the HOA's confidence," he said. "They think they're untouchable. It's not the first time. They act like they're the damn city government. They act like they want to be." That evening, I combed through the HOA's publicly available documents, meeting minutes, board votes, expenditure records, and something stood out. 3 months ago, there had been a vote to approve the acquisition and repurposing of adjacent parcels for expanded HOA assets. Attached to the minutes was a scanned letter from Hearth and Grove addressed to Karen. Directly, there was no appraisal attached, no inspection report, no title verification. I forwarded it to Alan. "Gotcha," he replied. Alan moved fast. Within 24 hours, he filed a formal complaint in Travis County Civil Court, contesting the fraudulent double title and seeking an emergency injunction against the Redwood Trails HOA. At the same time, he submitted a discovery demand to the HOA's legal counsel, requesting all correspondence, documents, and internal communications related to their alleged purchase of the lot from Hearth and Grove. He also CC'd their liability insurance provider. That's when things started getting real. I drove by the site again that afternoon just to remind myself it wasn't a nightmare. The lot looked even more obscene in daylight, like the ghost of a house still lingered in the soil. I stood in what used to be the living room and stared at a half-buried copper pipe sticking out like a broken limb. I kicked it until it snapped. Back in town, I met with Alan and a representative from the title insurance company, a woman named Miranda Wells. She was sharp. Early 40s, blazer, tablet out before I even sat down. "We've started a forensic trace on the Hearth and Grove paperwork," she said. "And it's bad." "How bad?" I asked. "Fake ID used to execute the seller affidavit. The notary listed doesn't exist in the Nevada registry. The EIN number on Hearth and Grove's filing belongs to a defunct landscaping company in Flagstaff. It's a paper ghost." Alan nodded. "Classic confidence fraud. Someone posed as the landowner, created a shell company, and offloaded a property they didn't own. HOA bit without checking." "And that's the part we're going to hammer," Miranda added. "Any competent due diligence would have caught this. They didn't even verify chain of title or run an independent survey. They saw a discounted price and jumped." "Is the HOA liable even if they were conned?" I asked. Alan smiled grimly. "Oh, yes. Especially when they went ahead and demolished a standing home without a legal mandate. That's gross negligence at best, criminal trespass, and destruction of property at worst." Miranda tapped her screen. "We also contacted the notary firm the HOA claimed validated the transaction. They've never heard of Karen Lowry or Hearth and Grove. That night, I got a knock at my temporary apartment. It was one of the movers from the original day, the guy who'd seen the gravel pit and helped unload Sarah's boxes into a storage unit instead. He handed me a thumb drive. "I had my dash cam running that day," he said. "Didn't think about it until now, but it caught the bulldozers coming in. There's even footage of them lowering a sign that said, 'Future site of Redwood Trails Community Pavilion.' Figured it might help." It helped. The video, time-stamped and clear, showed the crew arriving. No safety notices posted, no city contractor plates, just unmarked equipment, and one woman in a navy blouse barking orders. Karen. She gestured toward the house like a queen dismissing a jester, and the machines rolled in. I sent the video to Alan, who replied in under a minute, "They're screwed." The next day, local press picked up the story. "Austin man's new home flattened in Cho land dispute." My phone rang off the hook. Neighbors, reporters, even a guy from a podcast I'd never heard of. But the most interesting message came from an anonymous email with a burner address. Redwood HOA has a habit of doing this. You're not the first. Dig deeper. I forwarded it to Alan. I believe the phrase is, "Now we're cooking," he wrote back. The hearing was set for the following Tuesday. An emergency injunction to bar the HOA from touching the property, interfering with any further investigation, or, as Alan put it, continuing their pattern of recreational arson by bureaucracy. The courthouse hallway smelled like floor wax and desperation. I sat outside the chamber with Alan reviewing the exhibits, the video footage, the title paperwork, the email trail, the HOA's filings, or lack thereof. Miranda from the title company joined us briefly to confirm their official declaration. Hearth and Grove Developments had no standing to convey title. The insurance report laid it out clearly. The HOA bought from a non-entity. They'd been scammed. But instead of vetting the deal, they rolled out the bulldozers. HOA's counsel arrived, a man in a beige suit with slick hair and eyes like boiled eggs. He didn't even greet us. Just went straight into the courtroom with a folder under one arm and a Starbucks in the other. Karen showed up 10 minutes later, flanked by two board members who looked like they'd spent their lives frowning at property lines. She refused to look at me. The judge was a sharp-eyed woman with a no-nonsense tone, and she didn't waste time. Alan presented our case with surgical precision, outlining the forged deed, the fraudulent notary, the shell company, and, most damningly, the footage of the demolition. The judge raised an eyebrow when Karen's face appeared on screen, giving the order. "Ms. Lowry, is that you?" Karen adjusted her collar. "It appears so, Your Honor." "And did your HOA obtain a court order before demolishing this property?" "No, Your Honor. We were acting under the assumption that—" "That's a no." The judge cut her off. "Continue, Mr. Base it." Alan handed over the forensic audit from the title company. The judge scanned it, nodded once, and turned to HOA counsel. "Your response?" Beige suit lawyer cleared his throat. "Your Honor, while we acknowledge the situation is irregular, the HOA acted in good faith based on the information provided to them at the time. The information, the judge said, was forged. Their due diligence appears non-existent, and they destroyed a legally occupied property." He opened his mouth, then closed it. "I'm granting the injunction," she said flatly. "The HOA is hereby restrained from entering or altering the property pending further litigation. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for review of potential criminal misconduct related to trespassing, destruction of property, and conspiracy." Karen's head turned sharply. "Criminal?" The judge didn't even look at her. "You may leave." Outside the courtroom, Alan was positively glowing. "This is the part where they usually start backpedaling," he said. "They'll offer a settlement soon. Probably hush money." "I don't want hush money," I said. "I want accountability." "You'll get it," he replied. "But first, we keep pushing." Later that evening, I got a call from a woman who introduced herself as Claire Burnside. She lived on the other side of Redwood Trails. "I saw the news," she said. "I think we need to talk." She invited me over. When I arrived, she handed me a dusty binder. "This is everything I have from 3 years ago, when the HOA seized my father's workshop under the same community project language. They said the land had lapsed into common space. He had cancer at the time, couldn't fight back. They bulldozed it while he was in chemo." I opened the binder, scanned the receipts, letters, certified mailings, never answered. HOA board signatures. "Karen was vice president then," Claire said. "Now she's in charge. They've done this more than once. You're just the first one to push back." I took the binder. "Thanks," I said. "Let's make it count." I didn't even have to call the press. They called me. After the hearing, word spread fast. Local news picked up the story again, but this time it wasn't just a quirky HOA dispute. It had teeth now. Forged documents, criminal referrals, destruction of private property. KXAN ran a segment titled HOA Gone Rogue. Austin man's home raised after phantom land deal. The footage of Karen gesturing to bulldozers like she was ordering a pizza was played on a loop. People started coming out of the woodwork. A retired Marine named Frank called me and said his shed had been relocated by Redwood Trails for being unsightly. It had held his late wife's belongings. A couple 2 blocks over claimed the HOA had fenced off a chunk of their land and declared it common green space. And every single story shared one common factor: Karen Lowry signed off on it. Each time, the HOA justified their actions by citing vague reorganization plans, dubious land appraisals, or community benefit clauses from outdated bylaws. Alan was thrilled. "We're not just dealing with a rogue demolition anymore," he said. "This is systemic abuse of property rights. We can file a consolidated civil suit, and with the criminal case pending, the pressure's only going to mount." Meanwhile, the district attorney's office reached out for a formal interview. I sat down with an investigator who asked very specific questions about my communications with Karen, the board, and the HOA's legal counsel. He reviewed the footage, examined my closing paperwork, and asked me one question 3 times in slightly different forms. "You're absolutely certain you didn't build that house after the HOA purchased the lot?" Each time I showed him the inspection, records, the time-stamped construction progress photos, and the final certificate of occupancy dated over 2 months before Hearth and Grove supposedly bought the land. The investigator leaned back in his chair and exhaled through his nose. "That's good," he said. "We're looking at a multi-party fraud case now. Whoever ran the fake sale and whoever inside the HOA failed to verify it both carry liability." Sarah and I spent the next day driving back out to the site. I don't know why. Maybe to remind ourselves it was real. She hadn't seen it since the move was canceled. When we pulled up, she just stared through the windshield for a minute. "Jesus," she whispered, "it's worse than I imagined." I didn't respond. I was watching the black SUV across the street. It was parked at an odd angle, engine running. Karen was in the driver's seat, sunglasses on, phone in hand. She didn't move, just watched us. Sarah noticed too. "Is she seriously spying on us?" "She's not very subtle," I muttered. I walked up to the lot, took out my phone, and started filming. I narrated every step. "Here's the remains of the foundation. Here's where the master bath used to be. Here's the bent conduit they left exposed." And then I held the camera on Karen's SUV. She drove off. That night, Claire Burnside called me again. This time, her voice was shaking. "They tried to intimidate me," she said. "2 men came to my house this afternoon, said they were from the HOA Compliance Division and that my property might be in violation of setback rules. They didn't even have IDs. They just stood there asking about what I'd told you. You call the cops." Damn right I did, but they were gone by the time officers showed up. I called Alan. He sighed, long and slow. "This isn't just liability anymore. If they're sending people to intimidate witnesses, we can push for conspiracy and obstruction charges. I'll notify the DA." Things were spiraling, but not for me, for them. 3 days later, the first arrest happened. I was on the phone with Alan mid-conversation about the deposition schedule when he paused and said, "Check the Travis County Sheriff's feed. Right now." I opened the link, and there it was. Mug shots of 2 men, both arrested on charges of real estate fraud, forgery, and impersonation of a legal officer. One of them was Jonathan Creel, the fake seller listed on the Hearth and Grove documents. The other was a guy named Brent Morris, caught trying to close another fraudulent land deal in Colorado. They weren't local. They weren't even Texans. They were from Las Vegas, and according to the press release, they had been running a multi-state scheme targeting underdeveloped suburban lots, places where ownership was hard to trace or had recently changed hands. Travis County just happened to be unlucky enough to make their list, but it got worse, or better, depending on your perspective. According to the DA's office, the 2 men had made direct contact with the Redwood Trails HOA board during the sale process. Emails were recovered from Creel's burner account, showing communication threads with HOA board members. One of those threads contained a forwarded message from none other than Karen Lowry herself, confirming the purchase and approving a community planning disbursement of $90,000. That was money taken from HOA funds, HOA dues, from residents. Alan called me that evening. "We're filing a new motion, civil conspiracy to commit fraud and negligent destruction of property. We're also asking for punitive damages. This is textbook willful misconduct. The fact that Karen forwarded internal funds without verifying title, that's breach of fiduciary duty. She's personally on the hook now." And then came the real kicker. One of the arrested men flipped. He agreed to cooperate in exchange for a lighter sentence. He provided detailed information about the scheme, including how Karen had been eager to close off books and wanted to fast-track the property conversion without involving the full board. He even had voice recordings, scratchy, low quality, but clearly identifying Karen discussing not needing to drag this through county channels and acting fast before the new owners complicate things. The DA held a press conference the next morning. Karen's name was officially listed in a criminal complaint as a subject of ongoing investigation. Reporters swarmed Redwood Trail's offices, and I watched it all from the front seat of my truck, parked right outside the taped-off site of what used to be my home. 2 hours later, she was arrested. Karen Lowry, president of the Redwood Trails HOA, charged with destruction of private property, conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, abuse of fiduciary duty, obstruction of justice, criminal mischief. Bail was set at $200,000. Her mugshot went viral. I got calls from half the neighborhood. Some were in shock. Others, mostly the ones who'd been silently suffering for years, were relieved. Claire brought over a bottle of whiskey and sat on the tailgate of my truck while we watched the sun go down over the vacant lot. I didn't think it would actually happen, she said quietly. They always think they're untouchable, I said, right until the cuffs come out. And still, in the back of my mind, I wasn't done, because what Karen did wasn't just a mistake. It was a system, one she exploited, manipulated, and used to destroy lives. Now that it was collapsing, I was going to make sure it didn't take root again. The courtroom was packed. Local media had shown up in force, and so had half of Redwood Trails. Some were HOA loyalists. The clipboard crowd, arms folded, glaring like I'd burned down their community garden. But most were residents who had stayed silent for years and were now leaning forward, whispering to each other, waiting for justice. I sat beside Alan at the plaintiff's table, freshly shaven, jacket pressed, trying not to bounce my leg through the floor. Karen sat across from us, visibly thinner, makeup thicker, like she was trying to paint herself out of the narrative. Her lawyer, now a different one, younger, paler, probably cheaper, looked like he hadn't slept in days. This wasn't the criminal trial. That was still pending. This was my civil suit: destruction of private property, emotional distress, loss of use, breach of contract, and gross negligence. And we were asking for $2.3 million. Alan opened with force. He laid out the timeline, the verified title transfer, the fact that I had purchased the property through proper channels. He brought in the title company rep, the forensics expert who validated the fraudulent documents, the contractor who confirmed the build completion date, and, finally, Claire Burnside, who testified about the HOA's history of aggressive seizures. And then came the video. Karen, arms crossed, giving the signal, bulldozers moving in. The sign being posted, future site of the Redwood Trails Community Pavilion. The room went dead silent. Karen's lawyer tried to push back, claimed the HOA had acted in good faith, that they were unaware of the fraud, that Karen had simply been misled. Alan smiled. So misled she funneled $90,000 from HOA funds without full board approval? So misled she sent a private email authorizing demolition without consulting a judge, a surveyor, or the actual landowner. Then he showed the audio clip. Karen's voice clearly recorded. We need to move quickly before anyone makes it difficult. No need to notify the new buyer. They'll figure it out later. Game over. In closing arguments, Alan delivered the final blow. This isn't about a mistake. It's about a culture of unchecked power, secrecy, and self-righteous destruction. My client didn't just lose a house. He lost trust in a system meant to protect property, not obliterate it. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Verdict: in favor of the plaintiff. Damages awarded: $2,300,000. Punitive damages: another $300,000. Karen Lowry, personally liable for $150,000 and banned from ever serving on a homeowners association again. The Redwood Trails HOA board was ordered into state-supervised receivership pending reorganization, and their insurance carrier was advised to prepare for additional lawsuits from other affected residents. I stepped outside the courthouse into a wall of flashbulbs and reporters. For a second, it felt surreal. The architect who built homes, now famous for losing one. I gave a short statement. Property rights matter. Accountability matters more. Then I left. Sarah and I walked the lot that night, flashlights in hand. It was still bare, still raw, but it felt different now, like something clean, waiting to start again. Claire joined us. So did Frank, the Marine. So did a dozen other neighbors. One brought folding chairs. Someone else brought beer. We didn't plan a celebration, but one happened anyway. 6 months later, I stood at the edge of the foundation watching the new frame go up. Same plot, same layout, same orientation toward the trees, but everything else had changed. We upgraded the plans, reinforced slab, hurricane-grade windows, even though we didn't need them here, a steel gate at the front of the long gravel driveway flanked by cameras that didn't blink, and one very particular sign mounted just inside the fence line. This property is not part of any homeowners association, verified by court order. The builders nodded at me as they passed, not quite smiles, but that quiet, respectful acknowledgement you get from people who know what you've been through. It was different now. Everyone in the county knew the story. Contractors, inspectors, even the coffee shop guy who stopped writing my name on the cup because I was just the guy with the house. Sarah was there, of course. We weren't just planning to move in together anymore. We were planning a wedding. She called it the most expensive engagement gift she'd ever received. The Redwood Trails HOA no longer existed in its previous form. After the receivership was imposed, the board was dissolved, assets frozen, and a court-appointed administrator brought in. The pavilion, never built. The gravel pit where my house once stood had become a symbol of everything wrong with unchecked HOA power. Several lawsuits followed. Karen's trial went forward, and though she managed to dodge prison time with a plea deal, she was fined heavily, and her professional life disintegrated. She moved out of state, or so I heard. No one bothered to find out where. Claire helped form a neighborhood reform committee, but not to start a new HOA, to prevent one. They drafted a community charter, pushed through protections at the city level, and started working with state legislators to write a bill that would require stricter controls and oversight on HOA demolitions, title transfers, and use of funds. They asked me to testify. I stood before a legislative subcommittee in Austin and laid it all out. The fraud, the bulldozers, the legal nightmare, and the costs. Financial, emotional, human. I design homes, I said. Spaces meant to shelter, to last. But no matter how strong your foundation is, it means nothing if someone can just claim your land and knock it down. That's what this is about. Not buildings, but boundaries. The bill passed its first reading with unanimous support. I didn't build a fortress. I didn't need to. I just made sure that no one could ever again pretend I didn't belong on my own land. And in a way, I built more than a house. I built the end of their game.